World War I destroyed a generation between 1914 and 1918. Britain, France and Germany fought a brutal stalemate in the mud of Northern Europe. Over 200,000 Irish soldiers stood in those trenches wearing British uniforms. This creates a painful historical question. These men fought for the British Empire in France, while their neighbours back home fought against that same empire for independence in Dublin. They died for a king who was crushing their own revolution back home. Eric Bogle's song, The Green Fields of France, or No Man's Land as it was known as well, transports us back to this specific tragedy. It places the listener directly by a graveside in 1916. The lyrics strip away the glory and leave only the cold reality of a 19-year-old soldier named Willie McBride. It acts as a time machine, forcing us to look at one of the darkest moments in human history through the eyes of a single wasted life. But who was Eric Bogle? Eric Bogle was born on September 23rd, 1944, in Peebles in Scotland. He was a war baby, essentially, born just as the conflict in Europe was grinding towards its conclusion. He grew up in a United Kingdom defined by the long shadow of the two world wars. His father was a woodcutter who played the bagpipes, so he was exposed to music from a young age. However, his path was not initially musical. He worked as a labourer, a clerk, and a barman before emigrating to Australia in 1969 at the age of 25. By moving to Australia, Bogle placed himself in a country where the First World War, specifically the Gallipoli campaign, is often seen as essentially the birth of Australia as a nation, even though they were a nation since 1901. Yet, as a Scot, he remained an observer, almost like an outsider elite in the folk scene. He was culturally Scottish, but geographically removed from the United Kingdom, allowing him to view the Great War with a critical detachment that those living in the United Kingdom, still grappling with the immediate sectarian violence of the Troubles, might not have even possessed. His first major success, and the band played Waltzing Matilda, which was in 1971, this tackled the Anzac myth with realism.
And the band played Waltzing Matilda.
And the green fields of France would apply that same forensic sorrow to the Western Front. The specific origin of the song can be traced to a holiday Bogle took with his wife in 1976. They travelled from their home in Australia back to Europe, deciding to visit the military cemeteries of Flanders in northern France. This wasn't just a casual sightseeing trip. Bogle had described it as a confrontation with the scale of the loss. They both visited 3 or 4 cemeteries in the Somme region. In interviews, he recounts the sensory experiences of these spaces, the manicured perfection of the Commonwealth War Graves, the countless white crosses, and the deafening silence of the countryside. While there, he then began reading the inscriptions on the headstones, and something struck him: the repetitive tragedy of the ages, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. When thinking about this, he said, "I felt like an ancient grandfather walking amongst some of the gravestones. In contemporary photographs of World War I, they're all unshaven and dirty and unkempt, and they all look like old men, but the average age of the combatant was about 19. Keeping this tragedy in his mind, he retreated to his hometown in Scotland immediately after the trip and wrote the song that we hear today.
And did you leave a wife or a sweetheart behind? In some faithful heart is your memory enshrined.
So who is or who was Willie McBride then? Was he a real person or was he made up? It is actually a little bit of both, and it's quite interesting. Bogle mentioned that he didn't have a particular person in mind when writing the song. It wasn't from a particular gravesite that resonated with him, for example. The name was a choice of convenience for rhyming, essentially. McBride works well with graveside, fireside, and of course bride. But also in 1976, the UK was in the throes of the IRA bombing campaigns. There was a ton of anti-Irish xenophobia across Britain as a result. Eric himself was sympathetic to the Irish experience through his Scottish heritage, and he deliberately wanted an Irish name to challenge the British listener. After all, 200,000 Irish men helped fight for the British Empire in World War I. He was subtly forcing the audience to acknowledge that both countries shared the same sacrifice, something that was, at the time, politically inconvenient for both British nationalists and Irish Republicans. Although Willie McBride was made up according to Bogle, Pete Keelenz, who was the coordinator of the Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres in Belgium, had once checked all 1.7 million names that were registered, and in searching all of these names, there were no fewer than 10 William McBrides. 3 of them died in 1916, 2 of which were members of an Irish regiment, the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and had actually died in the same spot during the Battle of the Somme. One was 21 and the other was 19, matching the Willie McBride in the song. He is buried in the Auteuil Military Cemetery at grave A36, near the back of the cemetery.
2, 3, 4. There he is. There's a Willie McBride. 21406 Private W. McBride, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, 10th of February 1916.
Though Eric Bogle did admit that he did not deliberately pick the name from a grave that he saw, it's either just a pure coincidence or maybe he internalized the name unintentionally while walking through the cemetery. But either way, it's still really interesting to think about this. The 200,000 Irishmen who fought in World War I have been described by historians as a double minority. But what does this mean? In the British Army after the 1916 Easter Rising, while abroad at war, their combat performance was exemplary. High command, though, often fretted about their discipline and loyalty. In Ireland, they were essentially men out of time. When they marched to war in 1914, they believed that they were cementing home rule for Ireland. But by the time that they returned in 1918, the political landscape had shifted to radical republicanism. They were viewed by some as dupes of the British Empire. The song asks a question: did you really believe them when they told you the cause? This resonates differently in Ireland than it does in England. In England, the cause was the defence of liberty, but in Ireland, the cause was home rule, which was lost before the war even ended. Many Irish veterans, just to survive as well in this new landscape, would burn their uniform, get rid of their medals and their papers and all of that stuff. Veterans were often excluded from employment and social life. They were essentially strangers in their own land, despite potentially leaving to go off and fight in the war for the betterment of their own country. And this is a really harsh image in my opinion. So in a way, we know of no man's land as the space between the sides on the 2 fronts of the war, essentially. After the trenches, where you'll more than likely be shot down in a minute. But in a way, this new Ireland was no man's land for these veterans coming home as well. It was really only in the 1990s, with the peace process, that the Irish state began to officially embrace these men. The Furies' popularity with this song in the 1980s as well was a precursor to this, a way to mourn the men without endorsing the uniform. While Eric Bogle wrote the song, the Furies made it famous. Their 1979 recording, which featured uilleann pipes and Finbar's emotive vocals, it spent 28 weeks in the Irish charts.
Dear mind, if I sit here down by your graveside and rest.
1979 was a violent year in Northern Ireland. Warren Point ambush, the Mountbatten assassination. Throughout this time, the song resonated because it spoke to the waste of life, the waste of young life. A more recent bit of irony revolves around Tony Blair here as well. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He had named the green fields of France as his favourite poem, calling it a pro-peace statement. Though maybe it was his favourite poem. I mean, it is really well written, you have to admit. The imagery is strong and it serves a great purpose. Eric Bogle criticised this endorsement, noting that the irony of a leader who took the United Kingdom into the Iraq War. So in essence, somebody really likes a poem because it's a pro-peace statement, yet has made some conscious decisions behind joining a war. I know I'm trying to simplify it a little bit for a bit of humour, but you just have to admit it's a little bit funny. But another bit of controversy worth mentioning here as well was about Joss Stone, who released a cover which completely cut out the final verse, the political verse. Apparently after this, Bogle and the further folk community were outraged. This was in 2014, so if you're familiar with that, what were your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. I know in my other video about She Moved Through the Fair, for example, some of the verses are changed here and there for various reasons, which you can find out in the video. But that song isn't as closely linked with actual historical events as this song is. So choosing to leave out a very important part of the song like that, I'm going to over-exaggerate it a little bit, but it's kind of like choosing to say that the Irish never fought in World War I. Here's the simple truth. There was a Willie McBride. He was around 19 or 20 years old. He died on a quiet Saturday in April 1916 and was buried in a blanket in the chalk of Oatwheel. But here's the complicated truth. His death sits at the precise intersection of two great traumas of 20th century Irish history, the Somme and the Rising. He represents the lost generation, not just in the sense of life lost, but of memory lost. For decades, men like him were written out of the Irish narrative. Eric Bogle's song, through a combination of inspiration, subconscious influence, and poetic genius, retrieved Willie McBride from the silence. But what do you think? The history is complex. Irishmen fighting for Ireland and Britain in World War I, and the people fighting for Ireland at home around 1916. Question marks around whether so many should have even went to fight in World War I in the first place. Was it even the right fight? At the end of the day, I believe that each individual made their choices based on their best belief for what was right at the time. Personally, I didn't spend my whole life discovering Irish history through songs, but from my relatively short experience of Irish history and folk music, compared to the vast majority of all of you watching this, you have to admit it's hard not to have a huge respect for the music and history, don't you think? World War I was brutal. It was a brutal war. So much loss of life, but it happened, and we can remember those who sacrificed their lives throughout those years, whether in mainland Europe or in Dublin, through listening to amazing songs like this one, The Green Fields of France. So before you go, if you could do me a huge favour and click or tap that like button, depending on what device you're using, it really helps the video out and get discovered by more people on YouTube. Also, if you have a moment to have a wee browse through the shop, feel free to have a look. There might be something you like. I'm absolutely blown away by the feedback on my other few videos. So I know it's not a lot, but I've just gone and put a 10% discount back on all the products on the website for the rest of January. I will be sure to put more St. Patrick's Day stuff up there too shortly. Also, a huge shout out to our amazing channel members. Here's your names up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support. As I mentioned in a previous video, I'm working on something to give back to you all as a thanks, and I think I've settled on some lessons for Irish tunes, kind of like a video tutorial to help learn tunes. It's something I am able to do with the time that I have. If I ever come up with some more ideas in future, I'll be sure to let you know. And I can't actually believe I'm going to say this. I always give a welcome shout out to new members, and I'm not going to stop doing that now. But here's a warm welcome to all our new members. Satterley Butte, Dennis Fawn, Chad J. McDonald, Caroline Tierney, Breda Carney, BRT5273, Digrade Coat, Carol Sheehan, Andretha Faust-Bohr, Jimmy C, Thomas Moran in Space, Doppelganger Pictures, and Glilly. Sorry for any mispronunciations. Let me know if I did say it wrong and I'll fix it next time. But thanks so much to everyone for joining. Glad to have you all here. If you'd like to join them, click that join button down below, or check out the links in the description for more information. But anyway, that's enough for me. Thanks to all the new subscribers over the last few weeks. Looking forward to chatting with you all in the comments in future. Hope you all have a great day. Slán go fóill. Cheers.